Did Jesus actually rise from the dead? Welcome to the But I Don't Know podcast, the podcast where we explore the concept that we are wrong about everything. Most likely, it's really possible, but it's also possible that you're wrong about just as much as what we're wrong about. If you're not too sure what I'm talking about, go listen to our first episode. It will give you a lot of clarity on that matter. My name is John.
Sorry, my name is Jabe. I was slicking. I was doing the coffee thing. I was drinking the coffee. I wanted to slurp, but this mic stand is
so his name is JP anyway.
Goodness.
So welcome to the But I Don't Know podcast.
Everything's falling apart.
And we're so grateful that you're listening to this episode. We want to remind you that we've got a website, www.dunnocast.co.za. That's www.dunnocast.co.za. Jump over to that website. You'll see that we have a merch page on there. Finally, after a good couple of months. Hallelujah. F's in the chat, boys. No, I'm just kidding. JP has his shirt on. I've got my shirt on. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see how it looks. In fact, let me show you a quick picture. That's how the print looks. It's super cool. Jump over to our website, www.dunnocast.co.za/merch. Go read up there how you can get yours today for 225 South African rands. I think it's a pretty decent deal, supporting a good cause, shining light in a broken world. And thank you to those of you who have already ordered yours. You're legends.
Really good quality.
It is. It's pretty decent stuff.
Really good.
I really like my shirt. It's great. And if you want to know more about the print on the shirt, Love People, Hate Sin, go and listen to episode 25.
We prepare for our episodes here. We know exactly what's happening.
2 episodes ago, episode 25, called Love People, Hate Sin. You'll get a bit of context as to why this print matters and why it can change your world.
And the world. Of those around you.
Your world and the world. This week, we're heading towards Easter.
It's Easter.
It's not actually this week. It's next week.
Next week, yeah.
But we figured we want to do an Easter episode a bit before Easter because doing it after Easter is like nobody's interested anymore.
It's like doing a Christmas episode after Christmas.
Exactly.
In January. Who does that?
Who does that?
Freaking
There's probably
losers.
some people who do that, and they're probably better at podcasting than we are.
Well, most people are better than podcasting than we are, I would say.
That's true.
But we're not here for the excellent podcasts. We are here.
Exactly. We're here to fill a niche market of subpar podcasts. Somebody's got to do it. We're taking
Somebody's got to do it, yeah. You can't just have brilliant podcasts and boring podcasts. You need to have that middle spot.
It's that middle ground.
That mediocre one.
And we're happy to serve you in that manner. So we're going to be talking a little bit about discussing the question, did Jesus actually, factually, rise from the dead? And the reason why that's important is because over the Easter period, that's what Christians celebrate. At least that's what they're supposed to celebrate.
Yeah.
Christians. I'm talking to you.
Doing your Easter egg hunts.
Yeah.
How dare
you send your children
rituals.
to go look for a little piece of chocolate behind a bush?
That's satanic, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, but that's not what
you can do that any time of the year.
Yeah.
Except for Easter.
Yeah. Easter weekend, it's bad, man. It's bad. Anyway, we're not here to talk about whether Easter is good or bad. What we are here to talk about is the fact that Christians celebrate and remember, in particular over this weekend, Easter, the death and the resurrection of their Savior, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the chosen one, the anointed one. Neo and Jesus Christ are not on the same level. I want you to know that. You can't be like, Jesus is the chosen one. I mean, it's different. He's the anointed one. Anyways,
continue. Just go on.
I'm
people are like,
I'm
John, we get it. You made a mistake, and that's fine.
Anyway, so here we are.
It's okay. You do this often.
And that's what we're talking about because it's important, because this is what Christians celebrate. And in one of our episodes, we discussed why it's so important that Jesus rose from the dead. And we'll probably delve into that a bit again during this episode. But Easter weekend in particular is crucial for us to make sure that we're remembering the right stuff and we're celebrating the right stuff. And this conversation comes up over this time of year super often. Mm-hmm. Accusations get thrown in the direction of Christians saying, it's just pagan. You guys don't celebrate the right stuff anymore, or you adopted this date from the pagans or from the thises, and it's Ishtar and it's whatever else. And the Easter bunny is a fertility god and all sorts of things. But what really matters at the end of it all is, did Jesus actually rise from the dead? Because quite frankly, if he did, then all your arguments and all your accusations about an Easter bunny and an Easter egg and all that kind of stuff suddenly becomes unimportant. Because whether we're celebrating Easter correctly or not is irrelevant if Jesus actually rose from the dead. Whether Christians around the world are eating Easter eggs or sending their children on Easter egg hunts over this weekend is completely irrelevant if we know for sure that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Then, if we know that to be true, you are accountable to that knowledge. Fact.
Yeah. I mean, look, if it is the truth, then it dictates that you need to just believe it and follow it.
I hear what you're saying, but it sounds like such an argument that people are going to have a problem with.
No, we'll get to why we say that. And, no, but you can't, if you, I don't understand why it's a controversial statement to make it.
No, I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying I can imagine people getting a hissy fit, like, oh, you can't just say I must believe it. But
if it's the truth, you need to. What?
Bro, I want to remind you, it's 2022. Okay? People don't believe there's only two genders.
Did you see that? I want to recommend this. Babylon B did a wonderful video saying we're going to commemorate the top genders, right? And they had this list, and they were like, all right, in number, they're like, in second place, men. In first place, women. Thank you for watching this video. You can, but they do it a lot better than I do, of course. But I want to say this for those of you thinking, well, is this really an important topic? I want to remind you of the words of Paul in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15.
Before you read that,
no,
I'm sorry. It's just when you read that, I'm not going to be able to say what I want to say because it's going to be irrelevant.
Once you've read that. Saying Paul is irrelevant now.
No, I'm saying once you've read that, what I want to say will be irrelevant.
Say it. What do you want to say?
I want to say, if you're wondering whether it's important or not, you just need to consider the fact that for the last 2,000 years, the world has never been the same again. It's pretty important, even outside of what JP is about to read now, that is going to be more profound than what I'm just saying. And that's why I wanted to say it first, so that when you read that, my statement can disappear into oblivion. But I still wanted to make it.
Yeah.
For 2,000 years, man, your life has somewhat, in some way, been impacted by the resurrection of Jesus. Whether it's true or not, whether he rose from the dead or not, your life has been impacted by this moment.
Yeah.
By the claim.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's important, but JP's going to give you more important
And if you're an
information.
atheist saying, "Oh, but I don't believe it, and it didn't change me." Bro, you're literally watching this podcast right now. What are you doing with your life?
No, you're doing a good thing. Don't click off.
Don't click
you're
off.
doing a good thing watching this
don't click
podcast,
off, yeah.
so it's good.
If you do click off, come back later. Anyway, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, let's read from verse 13. It says, "But if there be no resurrection of the dead, then is Christ not risen? And if Christ be not risen, then is our preaching vain, and your faith is also vain." So for the Christians asking, why is this such an important issue? This is literally the event and the claim in history that your entire worldview and your upbringing and your culture to an extent and your faith and your moral standard, it hinges on this claim that Jesus has been risen from the dead. And if he has not, it's worthless.
Yeah.
All of it
100%.
is worthless.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important. Because if he has been raised from the dead, as Paul says later on, it means that it's not worthless. It means that, and I don't get this, because I've seen a lot of interviews with the historian that we're going to be speaking a little bit about just now, but where he speaks about the resurrection, and then a non-believer says, "Well, I just don't find the resurrection to be that interesting." I'm like, bro, the possibility of a man coming back from the dead is not interesting to you. Do you realize how silly you sound right now?
It's a pretty absurd situation. Like, if you think about the concept of resurrection, in fact, an atheist saying that is a bit ridiculous. The more I think about it, the more ridiculous I realize it is, because
Richard Dawkins called it pity. Or petty, not pity. Petty.
I mean,
With an E.
look, by
Pet-E.
sort of the atheistic standard, and I'm about to speak on behalf of atheists, and I'm not an atheist, and nor
call
have
Jeff.
I ever been one. But I believe, as far as they're concerned, when we die, we just stop.
Cease to be.
We just cease to be. Yeah,
Yeah.
we just stop.
Yeah.
We just aren't.
They are the real cessationists.
J-Mac, you got some catching up to do. But yeah, it's like you were and then you are not. Resurrection, if a person raised from the dead, whether or not it was Jesus is irrelevant. If anybody in the history of the world ever has raised from the dead, an atheist has to reevaluate that position.
Absolutely.
They have to be like, well, clearly I don't just stop existing. Something happens because I can come back from dying.
Yeah.
But how can I come back from dying if I stopped existing at that exact moment and then suddenly exist again? Remember that for the most part, the approach is I exist thanks to millions of years of evolution and chance, essentially, all the right things happening at all the right times. But now I stopped existing and started existing in a matter of 3 days, and I have no logical explanation for that because it previously took millions of years to make life happen, but now it just happened by chance, by accident, from somebody who disappeared and stopped existing completely, and now they exist again. It's absolutely absurd. It's crazy.
And it's ironic because this is the accusation that they throw our way. Because we believe in the resurrection. And they're like, "Oh, but you believe that a guy came back from the dead, bruh."
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, have you listened to why we believe this? Have you listened to the argument that maybe there are good reasons to believe this?
Yeah.
Like, you're just accepting that it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And that's a logical fallacy, by the way. You're accepting your worldview in order to defend your worldview, or in order to affirm your worldview. Like, you're begging the question. Ultimately, you're assuming, you're assuming your worldview to be true where you haven't really shown that. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's a bit
No,
off
but
topic.
it's interesting though, because ultimately there's two camps of people in the world: those who think someone can raise from the dead, and those who think someone can't.
Mm.
And that's not an issue of Christians versus non-Christians. It's just two camps of people.
Mm.
Because Hindus, Buddhists, resurrection is something that's, there's a special word I'm looking for, and I can't find it now, but it's cohesive with their understanding of life and their understanding of the world, and ultimately their worldview, because they believe that the soul continues on after death, and that's ultimately the distinguishing factor. Now, what's interesting is there's only really those two positions.
Mm.
Either the soul continues on or the soul doesn't continue on.
Sure.
And the biggest evidence we would ever have of the soul continuing on is a person raising from the dead.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need any more evidence.
Yeah.
It's literally, it logically just makes sense that if somebody dies and then raises again from the dead, they literally come back to life after being literally dead. It makes sense that the soul then did not disappear. And if you're going to be like, oh no, the soul just waits around for a couple of days or hours before it disappears, well, then we can negotiate from there, because then you do think that the soul continues after death.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately, you fall then into that group of people.
Ultimately, that's still.
Because there's only two groups of people.
Yeah.
There's not 5 million of them in this regard. Either the soul continues or doesn't.
Yeah.
And so definitely this conversation is imperative for both atheists and Christians alike.
Yeah.
Or let me say atheists and religious theists alike. Because it's one of the most polarizing concepts when it comes to the concept of death, is does the soul continue on or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's an important. I think it's it's self-evident how important this issue is, because like I don't even have to explain it. Like, bro, if a guy raised from the dead, that changes or that should change your perspective and your worldview a little bit in terms of how you view death.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
Like, we don't even have to go into, well, our worldview, Christianity is correct or whatever the case may be. We can have that discussion afterwards, but at least your perception of death needs to change, and your perception of the afterlife needs to change a little bit.
And ultimately, it changes from death is final to death is not necessarily final.
Yeah.
And it has to, like you say, if only one person raised from the dead, you have to at least entertain the possibility that death isn't necessarily final for you.
Yeah.
And that's all that really matters. It doesn't matter if death is final for JP.
Yeah.
What matters is death final for you? And we could say statistically, so let's, and I know we want to get to talking about the resurrection of Jesus
I've got some
in
stuff to
particular,
talk about
but,
here, bro. Come on.
but we could say,
excited.
okay, Jesus raised from the dead. Let's say we do prove that point. And then we could be like, okay, it's one person out of billions of people. So statistically, it doesn't matter. But this isn't about whether it matters for billions of people. This is about, does it matter for you? You who's listening to this podcast right now, the one that I'm talking to, if you've got earphones in, I'm speaking straight into your ear right now. You, sir or ma'am.
This has changed into an ASMR video.
It's about you. And statistically, you are the only other person that matters in terms of resurrection. If one other person raised from the dead, what that means for you, dear listener, is that there is a chance that death is not final for you? And that's what matters. What if it's not final for you? Maybe it's final for JP. Maybe it's final for somebody else. But what if you are the only other person and death is not final for you? Anyway, let's talk about Jesus.
Let's talk about Jesus. So,
That's a pretty good segue because we've got the answer for you.
wow.
If death isn't final, then we've got a suggestion to make.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So the most common thing that people say, and Christians do this as well, but I think that there's a sort of, and I fell into this camp as well. There's this sort of general ignorance surrounding the resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
A lot of Christians believe this, and I believe this to an extent as well, but I'll get to that when I get to that. But there's this general thing where, the resurrection is just something we take on faith. We can't really, there's no good reasons for us to actually believe it. Like, we can't explain it. We can't, if someone asks me, why should I believe it? There's no real good, tangible evidence for me to say, because look, it's more likely that it happened than not. We just accept it by faith.
Yeah. To be clear, when JP says there's no evidence or whatever, he's speaking on behalf of how people handle the issue.
Yeah.
He's not saying there is no evidence.
No, for sure.
But in general, as a rule, that's how people approach it.
But it comes out of this era of ignorance.
Yeah.
And I might step on some toes, but I frankly do not care. This refusal to research the topic,
to pursue knowledge.
Yeah. I spoke to, and this is a little bit off topic, but I spoke to a guy who gave the criticism of the Bible, and it was about the Old Testament law. The books, the verses in Leviticus. And he brought up what about this? What about this? What about this? And my first reaction was, well, you're right, bro. This in 2,000 years of church history, no one has ever thought of this argument. You have just destroyed Christianity. That's sarcasm, by the way. Sarcasm. It's not real. Then I recommended a book. Paul Cope. We spoke about this book. Is God a Moral Monster?
Yeah.
Go read that book. He says, I don't need to read any book. I know. I'm like, okay, well then this conversation is over. I mean, what else can I like? He brilliantly deals with all this.
Yeah.
Go read it. Go and research it. But anyway,
yeah.
There's this tendency. So what I'll say is this. I'm going to go through an argument that's actually popularized by a man called Dr. Gary Habermas. He's a historian. But what I want to say is, for the Christians, for the atheists, for anyone who's listening who's potentially interested in this topic, if you're not interested in this topic, I can't say anything. Like, I don't know. You should be. But I want to encourage you to go and see what he says. He's got 4, 5, 6 hour lectures on this issue. Yeah. He's currently writing a book about 5,000 pages dealing with the historical evidences of Jesus and the arguments that I will be touching on in a few minutes. I don't have the time right now to go through the in-depth arguments, and so I want to encourage you to go and go and watch these lectures. Go and read these books. I'm not saying you should read every single one, but go and familiarize yourself with the things that I'm about to be speaking about, because I know for a fact that there are people who has never heard of this, who's never heard of this.
I was one of them.
Me too, at a stage, and I got into apologetics because of someone I know who started questioning, a lot of. So I went and looked and said, well, these questions are hard. Yeah. And then I went and I saw the answers, and I was like, this is not that hard, actually. there are answers. But anyway, so the argument that he himself, that this guy, Gary Habermas, is speaking about is called the minimal facts argument. And basically, the premise of this argument is, well, if we can come to a common ground with everyone, like if we can accept, or let me put it this way, in terms of history, because if you deal with the resurrection on a historical basis, if you deal with the resurrection as a historical event, then you need to look at it through the lens of history and the study of history.
Yeah.
And so, if we as historians, and this is basically what the argument is, if we as historians can come together and agree on certain things that we accept to be facts, like this happened, and we've got good reasons to believe that this happened, and the probability of this happening is higher than the probability of it not happening.
Yeah.
Then we can work with these facts, and we can, because we both agree on them.
Yeah.
So what he said is his criteria is quite strict. He said only the things that 10 independent historians or experts on the matter corroborate certain facts, those facts will be included and considered into the argument.
Yeah.
So in other words, and on the entire spectrum of the entire spectrum, from Christians to atheists to agnostics to skeptics to, in fact, my mind is busy, but someone like Dr. Bart Ehrman, who's a historian, who's not a friend to Christianity, he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in God. He affirms every single one of these facts. He's one of the leading experts in New Testament history.
Yeah.
Gary Habermas obviously is a Christian. He believes in these facts. There are many historians, and like I say, they name these guys. And the majority of these scholars are atheists. They do not believe that God exists.
Yeah.
Now, we can get into the reason why they don't believe that God exists, but the fact of the matter is these facts are considered to be, pardon the pun, but are considered to be gospel.
Yeah.
According to historians.
Yeah.
These are people who do not believe that the Bible is inspired. Some of them don't even believe that the Gospels are historically reliable. Now, again, that's a whole different conversation. But the point is, these are facts that even the most hardcore skeptics say, this is really, and he uses the word undeniable.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot deny this if you know what you're talking about. You know, like people who deny the existence of Jesus. Bart Ehrman puts them on the same level as those who deny the Holocaust.
Yeah.
You know, it's like once you start denying these things, you've left the conversation. Historians don't take you seriously.
You've left the chat.
Yeah. Like they kick you from the group. They're like, no, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think we can run through. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Go for it, Bree. Go
Awesome.
for it.
So he lists 6 facts, right, surrounding the death of Jesus.
Yeah.
That all historians believe. So the first fact that he says is that Jesus died by crucifixion. Okay, so this is also a fact that everyone agrees with. Bart Ehrman actually makes the argument. So someone asked him, how do you know Jesus existed? And he made the argument, well, I know that he was crucified. If he was crucified, I know that he must have existed.
Yeah, yeah.
So the crucifixion of Jesus is a historical fact. You can't deny it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, that very soon afterwards, his followers had real experiences that they thought were actual appearances of the risen Jesus.
Yeah.
That's a mind-blowing fact, if you think about it. So what they are basically saying is, we know that the close followers of Jesus believed that Christ has appeared to them after his death.
Yeah.
Okay?
And it's important, the distinction that this is their experience and it's what they believe.
Yeah.
It's not, it's important to distinguish that, because often my problem, for instance, with science, and I don't have a problem with science. I love science. But my problem often with some scientists, rather, is that they overstep the boundaries of what they found to be true. So they'll say something is true, but they will just exaggerate it slightly to make it fit in, or make them sound more confident and more clear about what they've potentially discovered. And what I love about the honesty of that fact, and that you'll find that fact stipulated in so many textbooks and all sorts of places, is it's very clear that they believed the historical fact in that regard is that the disciples believed they saw Jesus.
Sure.
And it's such a beautiful
something.
it's such a beautiful transparent fact. It's like we're not implying by saying that fact that they actually saw Jesus.
Sure.
And I find that sometimes people overstep those kinds of boundaries, but I just love how transparent that is and how honest it is. And I think often Christian scientists and historians and psychologists and stuff don't get enough credit for their transparency and honesty in these kinds of situations. We're the ones who are willing to quite openly acknowledge how, if I can say, how limited the facts are. But like, even with the limited facts, it's overwhelming most of the time. Anyway. But anyway, continue.
So the second one is that they believed.
Yeah.
So, okay, maybe I shouldn't get ahead of myself here. The third fact is that their lives were transformed as a result, even to the point of being willing to be specific. Not to be.
Speak into your mic.
The third fact is that their lives were transformed as a result, even to the point of being willing to die specifically for their faith in the resurrection message.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, this experience that they had, because they had an experience, they believed to have seen Jesus. They experienced something. That's a fair statement.
Yep.
This experience changed them to the point where, let me paint this picture. They were morbid, right, when Jesus died. They thought this was over.
Yeah.
Because at that point, a dead and rising Messiah wasn't really, even though Jesus explicitly predicted his death and stuff, that wasn't something that the
Jews believed.
Yeah, exactly.
In particular, yeah.
And so now their Messiah is dead. What now?
Yeah.
And when they have this experience, now there's a change. And now they are even willing to die for this. And this is a very important fact.
Absolutely.
Because one of the alternative explanations, this fact does away with it. But we'll get to that.
On this one, I just want to mention it's particularly important when you consider the circumstances these disciples or apostles found themselves in before they were called by Jesus. Just very briefly, they were Jewish boys who had the opportunity to learn the ways of the Pharisees. And most likely, it's assumed that they were most likely not actually good enough. And that's why they ended up in other occupations, because just about every Jewish boy would go through the first process of learning, and then only the best were picked to become the Pharisees. And these boys weren't picked.
Yeah.
And then in their old age, I say old age, they were all young men, but they were older than what boys would have been when they were called by a rabbi. These guys were called when they were young men by a rabbi. Their last opportunity to follow a rabbi in his footsteps, and now he's dead. It's quite a distinct morbidity in that sense.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not only I've lost a close friend, it's not only I thought he was maybe the Messiah, but it's also this was my last opportunity to make my parents proud. I say that sort of in inverted commas.
Yeah.
But it's like my last opportunity to follow in the footsteps of a rabbi, which was my dream and my goal as a little boy, which we're assuming.
Yeah.
That's an assumption. But it was the case for most Jewish boys. And most likely for them as well.
Sure.
So it's quite an intense morbidity after the death of Christ.
And that gives credence to the radical transformation that this experience had.
Absolutely.
Like, we'll get to the explanations that's proposed because atheists propose explanations. One of them in particular is a crazy explanation, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
The fourth fact that virtually all scholars agree on is that these things were taught very early, soon after the crucifixion. In fact, Gary Habermas has shown that even skeptics believe that at like maximum 5 years after the cross, these doctrines were put into creeds and taught in the church. He says anything after that is like some people would even say months after the cross. So this is very early.
Yeah.
I know one of the accusations are that, you know, the books of the Bible were written so long after the death of Jesus, and sure, that could be true, but even in relative terms, if you look at like Alexander the Great, like the earliest biography we have of him is like 450 years after his death.
Yep.
Here we've got 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Or months, depending on, take your pick.
Yeah.
You know? And even if you take your pick, one of the Gospels, 100 years, it's still relatively, in historical terms, extremely close to the cross.
For sure.
And so that's the fourth fact. I don't know if you want to add.
Well, I don't know the exact numbers here, but for instance, when the earliest gospel was written, which I believe is Mark, if I'm not mistaken, there would have been scholars alive at the time whose parents would have been adults when this thing happened. There's actually, you can probably go and Google it and find the exact information, but it's kind of like scholars that were so closely connected to the situation would have still been alive.
Our witnesses,
for sure.
Yeah.
But there's one. I wish I had done a little bit of research, but there's one specific old scholar that they know by name that they say would have actually been alive, and we've got records of his works, and he would have been alive. Or I don't know if, well, he might have been alive then, but his parents would have been walking around same time as Jesus was crucified. Like, it's very close. It would have been difficult to wipe people's memories without a Men in Black thingy in that amount of time.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And I would also add that this fact, many scholars also use this fact to show that the tomb was empty at the time as well. And their argument is basically, well, if their message is that this guy rose from the dead, all we have to do is show them the body.
Yeah.
No, he's still dead.
Yeah.
And if you look at the earliest reaction of the Romans and the skeptics, they all said, we must say that the body was stolen.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make sense of the tomb. So Gary Habermas also, it's not listed in these facts, but he also adds this to the minimal facts argument, saying that Bart Ehrman accepts that the tomb was open, that the tomb was empty. These atheist scholars generally accept that the tomb was empty, based on this fact that, well, it was so early that basically you could still like see the body if the body was still there.
Just identify him, problem solved.
But like that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Gives credence to that the tomb was empty. But anyway, the fifth fact is that James, which is Jesus's unbelieving brother, became a Christian due to his own experience that he thought was the resurrected Christ.
That's amazing.
This fact is mind-blowing
Yeah.
because this is essentially an atheist experiencing the same
possibly
sort
a
of
Jew,
thing.
A Jew. But yeah, I know what you're saying. An unbeliever.
An unbeliever.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking in relative terms to today. Like this is like if an unbeliever would experience this, but like someone who doesn't believe sees and experiences the same thing that the close followers of Jesus said. This is a neutral party.
Yeah.
You know, this is also a very important fact for one of the proposed explanations for later that we'll deal with. But I don't know if you want to say something.
No, I just want to say it's amazing to think that Jesus' own brother thought that he rose from the dead.
Yeah.
It's like if it was somebody else, James would have been like, guys, that's not Jesus, man.
Yeah.
I'm his brother. I know him well. That's not Jesus.
Yeah.
But he was like, I saw him and...
it's him.
Yep, I think that was Jesus.
It's
he
him.
definitely thought it was Jesus.
Yep.
That's interesting.
That's very interesting. But probably the most interesting fact, John.
Yes, JP, I'm listening.
Is the sixth fact that says that the Christian persecutor, Paul, formerly Saul of Tarsus, also became a believer after a similar experience. In other words, Paul, the one who persecuted the church, also believed that the risen Jesus has appeared to him.
Yeah. And gave up a lot to follow that.
Yeah, but this is also a very significant fact.
Yeah.
So these are the six facts. Basically, if we can just go around
Summarize them.
Jesus died by crucifixion. We can say definitely Jesus died by crucifixion. It's a fact of history.
Yeah.
It's a fact of history that his disciples thought after his death, believed after his death that Jesus appeared to them bodily after being resurrected. Third one is that their lives were transformed as a result of this.
Yeah.
Fourth is that these things were taught very, very close to the death, which gives credence to the fact that the tomb was empty.
Yeah.
Fifth, Fifth, James, which didn't believe, believed that Jesus after his death appeared to him as well.
Yeah.
And Paul, the persecutor of the church, believed that Jesus appeared to him after his death. These are six facts of history.
Yeah.
Like these are undeniable facts.
Historical.
You can't deny it.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Now, for interest's sake, I just want to mention that there is a reason why it's important to distinguish that the disciples thought and believed that Jesus rose from the dead, and distinguishing that from James believing it and Paul believing it. Because both James and Paul represent different crowds of people.
Sure.
In essence. And that's why it's important that we distinguish that those two in particular are historical facts, because they represent totally different perspectives and totally different angles.
So now the question is, what is the best explanation that accounts for all of these facts?
Tell me, JP. I don't know.
So the naturalists, the atheists come with different theories, right?
Yeah.
The first theory is that, they hallucinated.
They were on the shrooms.
They were on the shrooms and they hallucinated.
Yeah.
This doesn't work for a few reasons. Number one, the empty tomb. It doesn't explain the empty tomb.
Yeah.
Number two, crowd hallucinations are extremely rare.
Yeah. Number three, Paul wasn't part of the crowd.
Well, we get to that, John.
I know,
Just wait a minute. Yes. Crowd hallucinate. Ignore what John just said. Crowd hallucinations are extremely rare, right? Next one, typically people who experience hallucinations of lost ones, because that happens, they know it's an hallucination. Yeah. Typically.
Well, their immediate assumption is not this person's raised from the dead. Their immediate assumption is I'm seeing an hallucination.
Exactly.
Which we could also then use Thomas as a clear example, because that's what Thomas legitimately thought.
That's what he thought.
He pretty much said that. He was like, no, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
And Jesus was like, well, touch me. It's fine. Come and touch me.
What is happening with your coffee?
It's just turning off, bro. Don't stress, bro. Don't stress.
It's
So, yeah.
transforming here. But it also doesn't work because James also saw Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, he was an unbeliever. He had no reason, because ultimately the hallucination theory comes out of this the idea of mourning. If you lose a loved one and you mourn them, they appear to you in a hallucinatic form.
Sure.
Now, James was the brother of Jesus, so that makes sense. You know, he lost a brother.
Yeah.
He hallucinated that his brother appeared to him. It makes no sense with Paul.
None whatsoever.
Because Paul is hostile towards this message.
Yeah.
It makes no sense with Paul. You cannot explain why Paul would experience the same hallucination.
Yeah.
Far removed from the initial experience with the disciples, if it was a hallucination. It just doesn't make sense. So you've got the empty tomb, you've got the different people experiencing this thing.
Yeah.
The hallucination theory is weak source, basically, is what I'm saying.
The one other thing I want to mention, we're already 45 minutes into this episode.
It's going to be a long episode.
One other thing I want to mention is that even if we assume that for some reason Paul was going through an emotional turmoil, having killed lots of people, well, he didn't physically kill them, he called for their killing. But even if that caught up with him morally and emotionally, because some people might suggest that, they might say, well, it just caught up with him that he had killed all these poor innocent people. Even if that is the case, the chances of his hallucination falling in line with what all the other people hallucinated, and then all those other people just accepting him on basis, just accepting him on basis of disconnected hallucination. That thing comes to another thing we'll talk about, the fact that these people's lives changed so much. And that can then be seen in the way they accepted Paul after he had killed a bunch of them. And if it was just an hallucination and then Paul came and said, I saw the same hallucination, and they weren't truly changed, they would have been like, bro, get out of here. This is an exclusive club and you're not part of it. So anyway, that's just like some sideline.
The hallucination theory doesn't work.
Yeah.
The second theory that they propose, and this is a real one, they say that the disciples just lied.
Yeah.
This doesn't work on a few levels as well.
Absolutely
because
not.
It does not account for the empty tomb.
Yeah.
Unless you want to alter the theory and say they stole the body.
They stole the body, which
was a reaction at the time. It still doesn't work because, first of all, they were willing to go to excruciating deaths for this belief.
Yeah.
And there's a saying, and Dr. Mike Licona has popularized this. He's also a Christian historian. He popularized this expression. He says, martyrs make bad liars.
Yeah.
Typically, you don't get people that would die for something that they know is an absolute lie.
Yeah.
You get people who die for things that they believe is true.
Yeah.
And that's why historians say these people believed it.
Yeah.
Which is that distinction that you spoke about also.
Yeah,
but it also doesn't work because James experienced something.
Yeah.
He believed as well. And he was also willing to undergo persecution for this.
Yeah.
And also Paul experienced.
Yeah.
And to what degree, they lied. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. So if James was in on the lie, it could make potential sense because it was his brother and he wanted to continue the legacy of his brother. But for Paul to believe the lie and to literally give his life and die for that lie it's not the most logical.
No, it's fairly illogical.
It's fairly illogical.
Dr. David Wood made this point. He said, obviously this doesn't mean that it actually happened. The fact that they were willing to die for it. I mean, people are willing to die for all kinds of ideologies. But he said that there's a difference between people dying for their ideology and people dying for something that they claim to have seen with their own eyes. It's like saying, I am willing to die for my belief in aliens. I don't believe in aliens, but he uses this analogy, and it's a good analogy. He says, you've got a person. He believes that aliens exist. He's willing to die for that belief, right? That shouldn't pique your curiosity to the point where you start taking belief in aliens seriously.
Yeah.
But if someone claims to have been abducted by aliens and they are willing to be put to death, they are willing to be put to death for this claim,
Yeah.
and excruciating death. Now the question must be, well, he must have experienced something,
Yeah.
and at least it should pique your interest into investigating it a little bit further.
Yeah.
Like going so far as to say, I will die for this testimony that I have
100%.
witnessed.
Yeah.
That is what gives it its oomph.
Yeah. And now it's not only one person
Yeah,
that did this and went through that excruciating death.
yeah.
There's a number of
There are a few
testimonies.
of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So-
the thing is, even if one of the disciples were crazy enough to be put to death for this message, all of them,
Yeah.
Paul,
Yeah.
James,
And after watching the others go through that,
exactly.
like the last guy, I would think might be like, you know what? None of them are around anymore to see. I'm gonna come clean, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So this theory doesn't adequately explain everything. So in history, you have a criteria called explanatory power.
Yeah.
Does it explain all the facts? And these theories don't.
For sure.
Now, those are the top theories. There's another theory that's a little bit in the realm of
Absurdity.
what are you speaking about? And this
Yeah.
is a serious theory put forth by an atheist historian who says, well, maybe, John, Jesus had a twin brother, a long-lost twin brother.
Yes.
And you can go read. This is an actual theory.
Yes.
He had a long-lost twin brother. And when Jesus was crucified, it was the long-lost twin brother who appeared to the disciples after he stole the body, because they need to
Yeah.
account for that as well.
Yeah. So it was actually his evil plan.
Yeah.
Like the disciples believed what they saw because they did see it, because it was long lost brother's plan
Yeah.
to fool them
To fool them.
that he was actually Jesus.
Yeah.
And then after 40 days get taken up on a cloud somehow. I don't know how you arranged that and how you made that happen.
It's an absurd claim. It's on the realm of, you know how you watch these conspiracy theory videos on YouTube, and I don't want to call anyone out, but sometimes, it gets to the point where you just say, guys, just calm down.
Just stop.
Just stop it. That's an actual theory put forth. That
That's
wasn't
interesting.
considered. That wasn't considered in the circle of
Yeah.
people who knows, who take things
Understand
serious.
history.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, let's put it this way: as far as history goes, there is zero evidence that is true.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I think that's the thing here. We're
Yeah.
talking about the historical evidence, and there is literally zero historical evidence that Jesus had a twin brother.
Yeah.
Literally zero.
Yep.
So, like, you're introducing a fact that is not supported by historical fact, and it's not even supported by the mythology, and if you want to say the Gospels are not fact or whatever, it's not supported even by a document outside of what this guy proposed
Yeah.
2,000 years later.
Sure.
It's absurd.
Sure. Yeah. So that's one of the most obscure theories that I've listened to, and then
Yeah.
the next one is a little bit more obscure, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'm taking it from least obscure to most obscure. The next one is, well, Jesus didn't actually die
Yes.
by crucifixion. He survived.
Yes.
They put him in the tomb, and then he appeared to them later.
Yes.
Now, if you understand Roman crucifixion, you would not make this claim.
And particularly the crucifixion Jesus went through.
Yeah.
Because, like, in general, Roman crucifixion was pretty bad.
The Romans knew how to execute a person.
No, they were pretty.
They had a 100% success rate.
They were skilled, yeah.
specifically in crucifixion.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just the fact that he had nails through his. It's the scorching that happened before the time.
Yeah.
And many people, historians believe that many people actually would die just because of the scorching before the time.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I mean, you've got claims and examples from history where the scorching before the time exposed the bones of the people before they were put on the cross. And then they were put on the cross for hours and hours and hours after that scorching.
Yeah.
And then if they didn't die for some reason, they would break their legs so that they would literally hang themselves to death. The point is, guys, Jesus died.
Yep. And then we introduce the empty tomb.
Yes.
Which I know people will be like, yeah, but if he did survive, then he just walked out. Well,
after being scourged 3 days later, it's just like, oh, guys.
Exactly. He had to open the tomb, first of all. Yes. Now, remember, he would be the only one who knew this, because if the disciples knew that he had just survived and was now just showing up again, they wouldn't have been like, hey, raised from the dead. So they thought that he raised from the dead. So they didn't know he was alive.
Yeah.
So he would have had to open the tomb in his scourged state.
Yeah.
And he would have had to do it at the exact time that the centurions were asleep.
Yeah.
And he had to roll the stone open by himself from inside. It can't.
No, guys, like, listen, he died. Okay, he died via crucifixion. It's like, you can't. He died. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it just ignores all common sense.
Yeah.
It ignores all reason and medical knowledge.
Absolutely.
So that's and then my favorite one that I've heard a few days ago, and I told you this before we started recording. I watched a debate on the resurrection.
This is beautiful.
This is between Dr. Mike Licona and another, I can't remember this guy's name. Yeah. But he's also an historian. Well, he's not an historian, he's a philosopher. He's an atheist philosopher.
Yeah.
Brilliant guy. You listen to him, he's logical in everything he says. You know, he makes some great points.
Yeah.
But now, Dr. Mike Licona confronts him with these facts. And he says, these are the facts of history. What do you do with it? And then he says the following. And I hope this gives you encouragement, Christians, that these are the type of things that they have to say to explain these facts. He says the following. He says, well, maybe, John, we must consider the possibility, John, that rarely in history people just naturally come back from the dead.
Just randomly.
Just randomly.
Random people.
In other words, resurrection.
Yeah.
Which is what we are saying.
Yeah. But it's not important, JP, because it's random.
But
and it's infrequent. Therefore it's unimportant. Don't you understand? Don't you understand that the infrequency of it and the randomness of it makes it irrelevant and unimportant?
This was an actual answer to the question, what do you do with the facts of history?
Yeah.
Well, maybe people just come back from the dead.
But I mean, we kind of spoke a bit about that at the beginning of the episode, this concept of, well, if it's happening randomly, you know, let's say, for instance, you are right.
Sure.
Okay, fine. So then you're in the camp that the soul lives after death.
Yeah.
So death is not final. You have to be in that camp.
Yeah.
And I want to remind you, listener, as I speak into your ear, that if the chances are there that death is not final, then that means death might not be final for you. And that's all that matters. Doesn't matter if it's final for me or if it was final for Jesus. What matters is it final for you? Sorry.
So
ASMR.
The best, I would say, and I'll end off with this. I'll say the best explanation because this is what the argument is. It's an inference to the best explanation that accounts for all these facts.
Yes.
Is that Jesus was raised from the dead.
Yes.
And that's the best explanation we've got.
Now that doesn't say that it is an historical factoid. In the sense of some of you might be like, yeah, but that's just an interpretation and an assumption based on the facts.
But it's the best. Give a better explanation.
But that's the point here. It's like, okay, yes, we'll be open and we'll say yes. It's an interpretation of the facts.
Yeah.
But it's the best one.
Even like atheists, even your guys are saying maybe people just raised from the dead. Like that's like what is a better explanation?
Yeah.
It's got explanatory power. It accounts for all the facts.
Yeah.
And by the way, these are the minimal facts. There are more facts
100%
to that we can go into detail with that gives credence to this. And in fact, Dr. Gary Habermas is writing a book, I think I said this, about 5,000 pages thick, dealing with this.
Yeah.
Like these aren't just the things that this isn't an exhaustive list of facts.
Yeah.
And in fact, Dr. Bart Ehrman would like put more facts in, and he would gladly concede. He accepts these facts.
Yeah. So here's the thing. We need to bring this episode to a bit of a close.
Sure.
But here's the thing, right? If we've only managed to convince you, dear obscure atheist listener that we keep talking to, that we're not even too sure if you're out there listening. I always operate under the assumption that it's actually just our close friends and family listening to us.
Thank you, guys.
You guys are awesome, man. But if you're out there listening, we really do hope that there's people listening to this who aren't just fundamentally Christian like we are. And we really hope that we can engage in conversation in a nice way, and in a way that doesn't just send you packing. But if we've only managed to convince you of one thing today, and that is that the resurrection of Jesus is not just some abstract, absurd fable
That you just take by faith.
that we just take by faith, but there is actual historical evidence that a man named Jesus raised from the dead. Okay? If we've just managed today to convince you to consider the fact that death is not necessarily final, there is so much for you to know about what then. So much to explore. And we're not saying, I know that if you're listening to this, you've got some sort of relationship to Christianity, at least in an academic knowledge way, that you know something about Christianity. And it's not to say now, oh no, now you must just suddenly believe in Jesus. But you need to consider, for realsies, what if death isn't final for you?
Yeah.
I beg of you to consider it.
Yeah.
I plead of you to consider it. I want to encourage you to listen to 2 episodes of ours, other than our first 3 episodes. Episode 11 is called Is God With Us?, where we speak about Jesus becoming flesh, and we speak more importantly, I think we brush on this a little bit in that episode, the concept that he is still flesh. He is still a man. And there's something important in that for you to grasp.
Yeah.
If you've just explored the idea that maybe just for one person in the history of eternity, death wasn't final, and that person is Jesus, know this, that he is still a man. And that's important. And we explain a little bit of that in that episode. Episode 11, Is God With Us? The other episode I want to encourage you to listen to is Did Jesus Claim to Be God? Episode 23. So if we know that Jesus, or if you're considering the fact that Jesus raised from the dead, and then go listen to the episode titled, Is God With Us? And you consider the fact that Jesus is still alive, and then consider episode 23, Did Jesus Claim to Be God? Oh man, it's going to rock your world.
I don't know about you, bro, but like if I need to listen to one guy in history, it's the guy who raised from the dead. I mean, that's
Sure.
you know, like if he makes claims about himself,
Yeah.
saying that I am God, not me, but
Yeah.
and I will be put to death, but I will raise again.
Yeah.
And then he does those things. I'd be
Yeah.
like, this guy knows something.
Yeah.
And maybe I should take him seriously.
Yeah.
And I want to say, and I want to end off with this, Christians, take courage that your beliefs aren't baseless in terms of
100%.
natural history. If we, and it makes sense to me to say that if we believe that the resurrection of Jesus is a historical event, then there will be historical evidence.
Yeah.
We have historical evidence.
Yep.
And it's just a matter of putting those things together.
Yeah. And as a last thing, I want to say this, that we are not suggesting that these 3 episodes I recommended, for instance, are the authority on this information. By no means. In fact, if you listen to our first episode, you'll see we are not the authority on anything. And honestly, these people that like JP's talking about are far more clever than we are.
Oh, for sure.
But I think it was in our previous episode, we made a joke about the fact that our podcast is subpar. It's like a mediocre podcast. But the advantage I feel that we have is that we get to evaluate this information very much the same way our listeners would. We are not experts. We did an episode, I think episode 2, about our qualifications, and we are very unqualified to speak about this stuff. But we pray that our analysis of it helps you to analyze it for yourself. Because that's the thing here, is you can go and read the 5,000 page book that this guy wrote when he's done with it. And I'm sure it's going to be great. But the reality is that not all of us are as clever as that guy is. And like JP and I lean very heavily on people smarter than we are.
Yeah.
You know, JP, this whole thing we've just presented today, these 6 points, are only available to us because of people cleverer than both of us. But
both Christians and atheists included.
But that doesn't mean, and this is my encouragement, and ultimately this is what this podcast is about. Just because there's people cleverer than us doesn't mean we don't have a voice, and it doesn't mean we should not consider these things.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we should not talk about these things. JP and I are possibly wrong on so many things, but I don't know. It's so dumb. But the point is, that's what we want to do with this podcast, is we want to encourage you. Don't think just because you're not an intellectual in the realm of history or in the realm of resurrections that you can't have a voice and an opinion and talk about it confidently. It's okay to have some things wrong. It doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue that which is right.
Yeah.
Constantly pursue it. Have dialogue about it. Be open to what's there and what's available to you, but pursue it and talk about it. It's in talking about it most of the time that we have the biggest revelations, honestly, not in listening. So this podcast is somewhat better for JP and I than it is for you guys, but it is what it is. That's why I keep saying, get involved in the conversation. Head over to our socials, Instagrams, Facebooks, YouTubes. Get involved in the conversation. Get in touch with us. Speak to us. We want to know your thoughts.
We want to speak to you.
We want to speak to you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. It's been a good one. I've enjoyed it. Thank you, JP. Thank you for the lots of information.
Thank me. Thank Gary Habermas and Bart Ehrman and
but you introduced
Mike Licona and
you introduced that information to us, plebs.
Well, that's also go and research this for yourself. Go read these people's works. Go and look at what they are saying.
For sure.
They've got good reasons for saying what they're saying.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. We want to remind you about our merch line. Please go and have a look. Consider buying a t-shirt or two. Remember, the more you buy, the more you save. It's maths, baby.
You can't argue maths, dude.
And if you want to find out more about the t-shirt and why it says what it says and stuff, episode 25, Love People, Hate Sin. Go give that a listen. It's a cool episode.
Is math related to science? thank you so much for watching that very fascinating episode about that very fascinating topic. We would like to remind you that we've got other fascinating episodes and other fascinating topics on our fascinating website.
Fascinating indeed, JB. We're also on the following social media networks: Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
Wow, and we would love it if you would go there right now and comment on any one of them or all three of them, if you please.
That would be great. You're amazing. Don't you ever forget that.